Mr. Chair, Minister, in response to my order paper question of this past spring, you refused to disclose the number, disclose the amount of the largest single tax write-off. This is in contrast to previous practice. Did you order your officials not to disclose that number?
Absolument pas. C'est une décision qui est prise.
This is a decision made by the team after an evaluation of the situation, an assessment of the risk in the sense that we have to be very careful not to communicate information that could directly or indirectly identify a taxpayer. So I did not influence this in any way.
This is in contrast to previous practice. So up until this year, when questions like this have been asked through the same method, through the order paper, you have disclosed the single largest number, but you did not this year. This absence of transparency leaves people to wonder why. They wonder if there's a particular entity being protected, and they want to know how much the single largest write-off was. You've got, according to media reports, 11 entities combined for over $1 billion in write-offs. We're left to wonder, how big was the biggest one?
Je comprends très bien votre question.
I understand your question perfectly, but unfortunately, because we have an obligation to protect the information of individuals and not disclose, whether directly or indirectly, any situation of a company.
Then infer that this was actually an individual and not a corporation.
Non, un contribuable, j'aurais dû.
No, I should have said a taxpayer in the broadest sense, be it a company, a trust, or an individual.
Watching this committee hearing will conclude that you are more interested in protecting the privacy of someone that has failed to pay almost certainly in excess of $100 million in taxes owing, rather than being transparent with Canadians.
When you're in government, you have duties that you don't have when you're in opposition, right? I have a duty under the law. I am obligated under the law to protect the information of all taxpayers. That's not my personal choice, but if I wanted to disclose more, we'd have to change the law, because I don't feel like going to jail over this.
Question was not the question that I asked that you refused to answer on the order paper, and that you also refused to answer when Mr. Chambers asked, was simply the number. So we will not ask you who didn't pay. Will you tell Canadians how much the single largest write-off was in this past year?
I can't communicate that information because we feel that by telling you, you could directly or indirectly identify the taxpayer.
People may be left to speculate whether you disclose the number or not. But, Minister, there's an alarming trend underway here. The amount in aggregate that you disclosed is unprecedented. You have, according to the media reports, 11 tax filers combining for over $1 billion in write-offs, suggests a series of exceptionally large write-offs. How many full-time equivalents are there right now for the employee count of the CRA?
How many employees? About 58,000 in the agency, about 58,000.
Army of 58,000 tax collectors. The Canadian Army has only 33,899 full-time active personnel. Your army of tax collectors is enormous, Minister, and we are seeing an alarming trend of write-downs and failures to collect taxes. This is troubling for Canadians who pay their taxes, and your average filer doesn't have the ability to fight and be able to resist your tax collectors. It's the larger players that seem to be having their taxes forgiven.
C'est complètement faux et je vais vous
That's totally false, and I can demonstrate that with figures. When you look at the revenue collected by the agency 10 years ago, it was $376 billion. Today, we're collecting $662 billion. And when you look at write-offs, the money which, in your opinion, we're letting go, after a great deal of effort and not being able to recover it, used to be 3.3 billion, now it's 4.3 billion. So that means that in 10 years, revenue has increased by 76%, whereas write-offs have increased by 31%. So I think that that's an eloquent example of the performance of the CRA's team. Thank you.
Starting with
Mr.
MP Kelly for the first 5 minutes.
Okay, sir, what do we, will each side get a second speaker, or are you having a hard stop at 5:30?
A hard stop at 5:30. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I may share my time with Mr. Morantz if he has a question then. Mr. Hamilton, you may recall there were some pretty damning Auditor General reports over the years about the department and the call center. Currently, what percentage of calls reach an agent?
Well, I have someone here who can give that estimate, but we focus a little bit more on how long do they have to wait to reach an agent, and right now we're seeing some improvement in our numbers, but frankly they weren't that good earlier. We had a combination of things, a lot of increased demand for calls, and we've had to reduce our staff in light of financial requirements. So those two factors, in addition to, interestingly, a couple of other factors, I'd say increase in the population and newcomers.
Mr. Hamilton, first, I would prefer an answer to my question. You're going into what are beginning to actually sound almost like excuses. We heard from the minister that you have 58,000 employees. Now you're saying you don't have enough to answer the phone, but if you could please answer, if you can't tell me what percentage of callers get through to a person, can you tell Canadians what is the average wait time then, if that's what you're focused on?
Sure, and I'll just try to find, if I can find that number of what percentage, but it's a pretty high percentage that get through. But the problem has been more, people had to wait for a long time. So that's, right now, what we're seeing, just based on the numbers I've looked at recently, people are getting through in minutes rather than hours. So that's very recently.
Like
but there
45
has been
minutes?
a stretch
50
over
minutes? How many
summer,
minutes?
when benefits periods come up, where we've had people have to wait for an hour plus on the phone. But maybe I can, I don't have it as a percentage, but I don't know, Jillian, if you have the percentage.
All right, that's okay. I got a lot of questions, but I think the point, I think I've got my answer now. In the 2017 Auditor General report found that 30% of people that reached an agent were given incorrect information. How have you done in that measurement? Do you have a current number for the people that actually are given accurate, helpful information?
Yes, and I was actually the commissioner in 2017 when I received that report. It was one of the first ones. And the issue there, one could quibble with the Auditor General's methodology, but the basic point was about 70% of people were getting the right answer, 30% weren't. What have we done since then? We actually have a new system that allows us to record calls and so we get to hear what's going on and then take course corrective actions if we need to speak to a particular agent about something. And the end result, along with a few other changes, is right now our accuracy rate is over 95%. Okay.
Okay. Now,
and that's been steady.
But back then, you also thought your accuracy measure was much higher than the Auditor General found. So, has this been independently verified from outside of your own department?
I'm not sure if anybody has verified it from outside, but we are very, very confident in it. No.
All
I don't know. And again, I'm looking at Julian Pranke, who is our Assistant Commissioner. If she wants to add something at some point, we can. But I'm very confident of that number because we now have the recordings.
Okay, I look forward to perhaps another audit on that. But also, in a different report that came out in 2018, the agency will automatically assess taxes on a tax filer if they fail to provide documents within 30 days, unless they have an offshore account or they're an offshore, they have offshore accounts or an offshore filer. In that case, according to the Auditor General, time extensions were granted or the taxes were in many cases just waived. Is that still the practice of the agency?
I would have to get back to you on that because I don't remember that issue from 2018, and unless one of my colleagues...
Let me refresh your memory. For other tax filers, such as those with offshore transaction, we found that the time frame to provide information was sometimes extended for months or even years. Is that still the practice, to extend requests for information for months or years?
Well, the way I would respond to that in general, again, I don't know about the specific question you're raising, is that we do try in our compliance efforts to be as understanding of what's going on. And that would apply to the individual business that you referred to or somebody in the offshore.
How so? When you say on a small business, they got 30 days, and if you can't provide in 30 days, you're done. They just assess the taxes.
Yeah, and again, that's not something I'm very familiar with, so I'd have to check in on whether that's actually true, whether it was true then or whether it's true now. So I don't know.
Are you questioning whether it was true then? This was the Auditor General.
That is the time now, MP Kelly. That is the time, and now we're on to MP Hallen, I believe.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, actually, this question is for you. The last committee, we passed a motion asking for, we were going to summon the finance minister to appear at this committee before we rise for this fall session to appear to answer for the fall economic statement. Have you reached out to the finance minister? And if you have you heard back?
That request did come through the committee, and clerk, did we?
We cannot summon a minister, but I did invite her, yes.
Okay. Have we heard back from her?
I have not.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I just want to clear up something with the minister's testimony. The publicly reported number for the write-offs was $4.9 billion. Just a few minutes ago, she said it was $4.3 billion, but I was unclear if that's going to be the number in the public accounts. Can you rule out that the number for the write-offs in the public accounts will be more than $4.3 billion?
Mr. Chair, let me give an opening remark, and then I'll turn to our CFO, Hugo Paget. I think one thing to recognize is we report on the write-offs in the public accounts. The public accounts for this year are not yet there. So, but we do have, there is other information that comes out before the public accounts comes in. So that's where, potentially the 4.3.
Not really looking for a huge explanation. I just wanted to know if you could rule it out. So I'm assuming you can't rule it out? You could say that.
What am I not ruling out? Sorry, I just want to make sure I had heard.
Can you rule out that it will not exceed $4.3 billion?
I don't have that information. I'll ask Hugo to.
Yeah, so the amounts that will be reported in the public accounts for write-offs will be $4.382 billion.
All right. Now, I just wanted to ask you about the capital gains tax. It's a bit of a mess. It was introduced in the budget in the spring. There was a Ways and Means motion that got passed in June, and then another one that got introduced in September. We have a minority government that seems to be on its last legs. It's a precarious situation. The government could fall. There are transactions going on. People will presumably be paying you the additional capital gains tax based on the increased inclusion rate whenever that money is due early next year. I'm just curious, what would happen if somebody paid the additional tax and the government fell, a new government came to power and did not bring in implementing legislation? Would that additional tax be refunded to the taxpayers?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just to respond. So the situation you raise, it's not totally unique. We deal with this from time to time, where legislation is put forward or a notice of Ways and Means, and the question is, do we administer it or not before it receives royal assent? In this case, we've been clear that we are going to administer the provision as per the notice of Ways and Means, and people will have choices about how they decide to conduct their affairs and how they decide to file their returns. In the specific case that you've raised, the reason I mentioned the beginning part is at the end, the legislation either gets passed or it doesn't. And then you have to have some sort of reconciliation at that point. So I will ask for Gillian to confirm this, but at that juncture, we would then try to write everything as if the legislation had never came. But Gillian, is that? I just want to make sure I'm right there.
No, that answer is good. I want to go on because my time is quite limited. Just on a completely other matter, and I thank you for that answer. In October, it was reported that there were 330 employees of CRA that inappropriately applied for and received the CERB who are no longer with the agency. These are people who are working that actually scammed the CERB program. I'm just wondering what efforts CRA has taken to collect the monies that were improperly paid to those employees.
Yes, well, our normal collection processes would apply, whether it's our employee or somebody else. If they collected a benefit that they weren't entitled to, then it goes through our collections process and we get the money back. I just want to clarify what we did, because that could have happened anyway through the normal thing. We actually looked to see who did it, investigated, and as a result, terminated a number of employees. Now, we had to go through a process because sometimes people can be coming on temporary basis, be students. So we looked at every case to make sure that it was inappropriate, they weren't eligible, and then we took action. But the collection was going to happen anyway.
Okay. Yeah, do I have some?
Seconds.
A few seconds? Well, I think that's good. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, MP Moran.